Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon of Track A. Was anybody as fond of the tiramisu cake as I was? Was that good? Whoa. I hope they have something equally good tomorrow. So this session, on your printed program, there is a session presentation from Susan Laird, and if you were here this morning, you heard me say that Susan could not make it due to a medical emergency. And substituting for her, I have dragooned Joe Hilger here, who is one of the co-founders of Enterprise Knowledge. And be kind to him, because he just put this together yesterday, actually probably last night, because I said, look, I know you can do this, Joe. And following Joe will be a presentation from Jeff Giles. Giles? Yes, there he is. And he is the principal architect with Sandhill Consultants. So I know that both of them are going to do a sterling job, and I will now turn it over to Joe.
Are we on? Can you all hear me? There we go. Thank you. So I'm going to carry forward on the talk that was planned, talking about data products. But we're going to talk about how to get from the ugly data that you have to the products that your business users want to see and work with. And the way we're going to do that is something we call a semantic layer. So the topic of today's talk, or the title, is Building Effective Data Products with a Semantic Layer. How many people know what a semantic layer is? Raise your hands. We got one. He was in our session workshop. We got two. 3. There we go. Good deal. OK, so let's jump in. In fact, so what we're going to learn today is definitions of a data product in a semantic layer. So after we leave, I hope at least half the hands raise when they say they know what a semantic layer is. We're going for 50%. Then we're going to talk about the features you need in a good data product. So what it should look like. I hear a lot of people talk about their marketplace and what they're doing there. That sounds fun and easy, but the reality is it's not about the marketplace. It's about the product itself, and that's what we're going to help walk you through today. Then we're going to talk about components of the semantic layer, how you got there. Anyone that was in my workshop will notice 2 repeated slides. I apologize, but I only had a day to figure this out, so that's what it is. And then we're going to talk about how the semantic layer helps with this problem. And then lastly, time permitting, if I don't have to get kicked off the stage, we're going to have us, I'm going to share some examples from clients we've worked with. So we introduced me already, Joe Hilger, COO, one of the co-founders of Enterprise Knowledge. Enterprise Knowledge is a knowledge and data consultancy. We started out in knowledge management, and all of a sudden we figured out everyone in data needed knowledge. And we said, wow, that maybe should be where we should be playing. So this is where we ended up about 4 years ago. So let's start with data products. We all talk about it. Again, you're talking about the marketplace, but it's more about the product. And I'm going to read this definition to you. And then I'm going to talk about what I mean by it, because I think there's some real meaning that we want to pull out of this. So a data product is a composite resource that integrates data sets with a domain model to simplify access to business-centric metrics and logic and provide structured access through APIs and visualization tools. So let's break that apart and see what that means. Composite, we've got one whole thing that you can work with. So when you go to the marketplace, you're finding something that's whole and usable, right? We really want to take that ugly set of data sets. Think about the data that you're working with. Most of it came from systems that had another purpose. It wasn't for reporting. It was for capturing information. Maybe a point of sale system. Maybe an ERP if you're replacing that, right? The data there was structured to align with the way they captured and managed information. It was not structured for reporting. And it was definitely not structured for an executive who said, well, I think I want this, but wait a minute, actually I want it a little different, right? So you need a product that takes the data the way it was and restructures it, not with ETL for those of us that have had to suffer through that all the time, into something that a business-centric person can say, I actually care about X, Y, and Z, and I don't really care what the prod ID is. I don't care about primary and secondary or primary and foreign keys. None of that matters to me. I just want my answers, right? So a data product enables it, and that's how we get there. So what makes a good data product? We've called out 4 pieces of information for this. I think the 4th level is the one that's most often forgotten about. But let's talk about this. Accessibility. And when I talk about accessibility, it's not I can find the data tables. So who here has a data catalog? Calibra, Elation, one of those, right? So you got something there, right? People. Yeah, okay, even worse. Yep. So maybe you have some metadata. Maybe it's searchable. So you've got an executive. Would you want one of your senior executives combing through one of those tools? No, not a chance, right? So when we talk about accessibility, it's not just findability. It's not that marketplace with the cool search and an Amazon-like situation. It is a tool that describes your information in a way that your business person cares about, right? So that's accessibility. And along those lines, we need to think about who they are. You've got your executive, you've got a data scientist, and everything in between. So you want to understand who they are and what they're asking for. We had some fun people from In-N-Out Burger here. And one of the things they told me at lunch the other day is a lot of the people there started in the store. And so IT is populated with a lot of people that started in the store. The good news is they get what it means to be in the store, right? The bad news is many of them didn't come from IT originally. They don't have some of that different background. And so for them, there is some overlapping, so some of this is made easier in understanding the roles, but at the same time, there's probably a sense where you want to get some outside views. And I think that's the case because at least 3 of them are here right now, not in this room, but at the conference. So usability, it got to be easy, right? So it's not a Calibra, it's not a data catalog. It is a front-end interface that's easy to work with. But when you're looking for things, and I always emphasize this, it's things. If you're in the banking business, right? You care about customers, you care about transactions, you care about accounts. That's what you care about. You don't care about ACCT_ID, right? That's not what matters to you. So what we want to do is start to model our business, and we talked about that in a way that you're seeing the things you're comfortable in seeing, right? Or I want to see burgers, or I want to see types of burgers, or I want to see stores, et cetera. So we need to work towards that. We need an effective search, documentation, and then next step, integrity. I'll tell you all a story. I'm 56 years old now, so this was a while ago. My very first job out of school was with Coopers & Lybrand. Anyone remember Coopers & Lybrand, PwC? I did my first project for the partner, and I built this really cool report, and it was really neat looking. But I didn't check my math. He brought it to all the other partners, and these were audit partners. And they looked at it. He was really impressed because he had this good-looking thing that some 21-year-old had done. Brought it to the other partners, and he came back, and I said, Steve, how'd it go? And Steve said, not good, Joe. I was like, what happened? He goes, did you do the math? They didn't add up. We lost integrity. It took us a while to bring that back, and it took me actually a little while to get back into things. So that integrity is important. The last area of this has to do with what we call interoperability. You are investing in lots of systems. It is incredibly important when you do that you stick with standards. We're going to talk about W3C standards for semantics. That's one way to do it. But in anything you're looking for, ask yourself, are there standards that I can rely on? Because if you're building a marketplace that doesn't have standards, you're building yourself into a hole that you can't get out of. If you get tired of your vendor, they're going to smile and say, next year's money, please, right? If you have standards, it's still not easy to move, but you can at least move. So that's important to us as you're making a good data product, that you're building it upon different standards that you can work with. So why a semantic layer? So here's another definition. I won't read this one. You all can read this. But think of this as that middle mapping layer that takes the data the way it's organized in rows and columns and in tables and in a structure that made sense for the system it used, but not for the person that's looking at it from a business perspective, and maps the business domain, the business structure to that. So it's a map. How many people here have heard Gartner talk about data fabrics? Right? When Gartners talk about data fabrics, one of the key pieces of it, and you go look at your Gartner reports, is actually within the data fabric, it is having a semantic layer. That is a big part of the data fabric, and that semantic layer has a couple things. It has metadata, it has a graph that does the mapping, and it also has taxonomies, so you can do these in a consistent fashion. So we like to talk about it as your Rosetta Stone, and I love this definition. Think of it. You've got this mess of data that we all deal with. Wouldn't it be nice for your business users if they had a way to read it that made sense to them? This is the translation engine between the two things. And this is how we put it together. So I only have 20 minutes, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide. But it's available for anyone that wants it. You have to go back and downloading it because I wasn't here originally. So when we're putting together the semantic layer, I talked to you almost about it. It's that layer in between. This is truly what it is. You've got all your data sources. And in the middle, you have a metadata service. And yes, that often is a data catalog. But it also, since it's data, it could be a content management. Since it could be any type of content, structured and unstructured, it could be a content management system too. So we like to say there's metadata. There is a knowledge graph. How many people have heard of knowledge graphs? Okay, there you go, a few more. That is the way that you are mapping this information. A graph is great at saying, here are the entities that drive the business. Here's the properties of those entities. And here's what they relate to. So, for example, a customer goes to a store. So store and customer are entities in the graph. Customer goes to store. A store has inventory. A customer buys inventory. We can start to map it out. When you see these graphs, you do this mapping. Once you've mapped the business the way it really looks, then you take those entities that you know and map them to the data sources themselves. So now all of a sudden, if I'm looking for things about a store, it brings up, here's everything about this store. And oh, by the way, if you want data, here's where that data is. And oh, by the way, if you want data, maybe it's content in your SharePoint system too. Maybe it's documents about what you did. Maybe it's policies and procedures that align with your reports. So this middle layer really truly enables that. And then lastly, taxonomies and metadata, or taxonomies and ontologies are how you model the system. The taxonomy is that defined list of terms that is consistent, that everyone agrees upon. So again, it's not just enough to say I've got a store modeled the way someone expects it, but the terms we use need to be the same. And for any of you at larger organizations, I bet those terms change a lot. One group calls something X, another group calls it Y, and they mean the same thing. What if you had a consistent list that everyone agreed upon? That's usability. So putting together a graph, a taxonomy, and metadata, guess what? The taxonomy is in the metadata that's tied to your data. You can slowly make things understandable and findable. So now, as we talk about how we go back and do what we want your data product to do, again, you've got the map. We've made this easy, right? We've also made it searchable because we have metadata. Accessibility. Those complex data structures are now converted into business structures that people understand. It's a single point to go to places, right? You don't have to go to 20 different applications to find this. Internal and external. By the way, we do a lot of this where clients want both internal and external stuff because it points to it. It doesn't move it, right? Usability. I think that's kind of obvious. Guess what? You've got faceted search. You've got all the things people have come to expect. You also search for things as things, not as data tables, so we don't have to do what you see in your catalog. which those of you that have it know it. And by the way, with integrity, and I'll tell you a neat story. We were working with a large coffee chain. You all may know of them. And they had 12 point-of-sale systems, right? I think you do it through your phone. What that meant for all you people in data, 12 different data structures for for different transactions, all different. And the rules for the simple question of what is an average transaction at our store was almost impossible. Some did it in 3 rows, some did it in 1, right? Like it was messy. So the graph that we talked about became the map that said how we do this. And instead of relying on some SQL code that some developer made, you had a map that was reusable everywhere you went to ask for this. That creates integrity. That means you do it the same way every time, and the system reads it instead of relying on an individual. And then lastly, guess what? A lot of the stuff can be done with industry standards so that you can pass it back and forth. And the neat thing is, because you're building it this way, you can start to share with others because graphs are designed to be shared, right? That's what they're very good at. So you suddenly have that piece in place. And then, how much time do I have? You're fine. Oh, good. So I can keep talking. You all have to keep listening. So here's a story that we talk about interoperability. We were working with a veterinary company. We're like, well, they're coming to us. That's kind of neat. So their problem is they had a set of products and things that they wanted to share to vets, because actually most of the stores you would work with actually were associated to veterinaries themselves. So they needed a way to talk about this in a common framework. And so what we built for them was a taxonomy, again, lists of terms that were consistent for how you mark their products and the ingredients in their products and map them, and created basically that map for that. So when they shipped stuff to people or when they talked about it, they could do it in a consistent fashion. But even more important than that, what they then did is they marketed it as the industry standard, right? You know, you can buy those industry standard taxonomies from places like RAND or other tools. They marketed it for their industry. And what it meant they could do is, because they were first to market, because they created this, they created a marketplace that they defined. They picked all the terms, all the rules, it was theirs. And that gave them such an advantage over the rest of the industry, because now when people went to buy, they had everything mapped the right way. And by the way, it was the way they wanted it mapped. So that interoperability, usability, and talk about integrity of what you're doing, because we knew theirs was right. Everyone else was immediately behind them. And so that's how they ended up in a situation where they could take over a larger piece of the marketplace, which was pretty big, by the way. I didn't realize how big that was. I guess I should have known that, having dogs. But it is a big space. And so this allowed them to become one of the biggest providers to veterinaries of medicines and other products in that space. Questions? We got time. Okay. I'll try again. Maybe I can get questions here. Oh, shouldn't have done this. So working with a global coffee house, maybe I should have picked a different story last time. So they wanted to answer a lot of key business questions. I gave you one of them. In fact, I'm going to scrap this. I'm going to tell you a different story. Working with, and I can mention this company. Everyone heard of Capital One? How many have the credit cards? Few? They got good airline deals, right? So Capital One had a problem they came to us with, which is they wanted to answer the simple question of, when did so-and-so start doing business with me? That doesn't sound that hard, does it? They have 10 lines of business. They bought a lot of them. They do investment advisory, right? So financial advisors. They do banking. They do credit cards. They have all these different things. So when they said, when did I first start doing business with someone? even if they solved the problem of who is that person and I have that nailed, right? Then they had to, so they knew, I've got Joe Hilger, and he's at 5 places here. When did he start, right? Well, guess what? In the credit card thing, the first transaction in one of the tables was open date, right? So they knew that. But then in the banking, it was account create date. And then in another place, it was a totally different term. So when they built their graph in their semantic layer, they said, I have a person has an account has a start date. And then from that start date, they mapped it to the fields that were the start date. And that way they could go back and automatically generate either, there are 2 ways they could do it. They could use ETL if it was going to take too long. This one wouldn't. Or they could actually have the mapping drive the calls to the database to pull this together and say, this is the oldest one of these that have dates. But that's not all they did with it. Once they mapped it to their business structure, the other thing they were able to do is say, this is an open date of an account. So there are some traits that I know about this that I want to make sure are always the same way. So as the graph mapped it, it also said the attributes that I expect on this thing are that it's greater than a certain date, right? That the date field is populated, et cetera. These are some things you might put in your system, but they wanted to make sure they had collections there. So it also, for them, helped with integrity, because they knew that it was checking that some of the basics were there in existence and that they could trust it. So for them, and this was, so that's a simple question. They dove into it a lot more and did a lot more with it, but that's what they did. If you're wondering how hard this is to do, it is something that's a project over time. You typically pick a problem and solve it and then grow. But for Capital One, from a scale perspective, if this sounds like Ken at scale, they have over a 300 petabyte data lake. And they could do this there. So I don't know a lot of people that have 300 petabyte data lakes, but if you have something less than that, you could probably do something similar. So these are the kind of things you can do. This is how we talk about transforming data from its inherent structure that was designed for a different purpose to a structure that is available to a marketplace as a data product that you can use and reuse over and over. That's it. Questions? Yes. Or do?
How you transform data,
Yeah.
so it becomes something that you can access to a marketplace.
Yeah.
So my question is, how do you see the relationship between the semantic layer and the marketplace? Are these the same thing, or are these different?
Oh, the semantic layer just enables the marketplace. Semantic layer helps take your data and make it into a product. It gives a product attributes and information that you can make searchable. So people search for products, and what they don't even know is happening is behind the scenes, that product is what they would expect it to be. Behind the scenes, the semantic layer is doing the transformations so that you can understand it.
Behind the scenes of the semantic layer, you have the catalog and everything.
All the data. And, well, actually, the catalog is part of the semantic layer. It's a catalog, a graph, and typically taxonomy management. Yeah. So I need to let someone else speak. Thank you all.
And you want to hand that to him.